Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned today, and I am stoked for this one. We got Noel joining us one more time. We got Pat joining us one more time. We got Greg joining us one more time, and Sean and I are here matching, actually, shirts and hats. This is a rare occasion. I am loving it. Now, while I'm loving that, you should be loving the show. Make sure you are liking the show, making sure you are hitting all the buttons, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. By all means, hit us up because this is going to be a big topic and I am ready for it. But before we get into it, Noel, quick hitter, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you, where you come from, all that good stuff. Hit us up.
Hey everybody, my name is Noel Brand. I'm a co-owner and head coach at Breda Strength and Conditioning, father of two, married, live in the Netherlands where I co-run an awesome strength and conditioning facility. I'm a former Marine, served for 14 years in the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps.
Bam, I love it. Pat, how about yourself?
Pat Miller, 20 years in the military, 8 years CANSOF COM, CSOR JTF2. Now I'm a film armourer. Military advisor on film sets, and but right now I'm pursuing professional photography.
Bam. Love it. Greg, how about you?
Awesome. Yeah, I was just on the show, 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
And,
exactly. Almost exactly.
23 years, started in law enforcement, street crimes, narcotics, SWAT, contracted for the U.S. government for about 8 years on a paramilitary program for the NSA, one of our intelligence agencies. And retired a year and a half ago. I'm Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and I'm now the CEO and owner of Fieldcraft Survival out here in Utah.
Bam. I love it. Sean, how's Mountain treating you?
Things are good out here. This is going to be a good conversation on national service, and curious as to where it's going to go, because the panel is more than capable of having an opinion on it, and just a broad enough range of experiences amongst everyone here that it won't just be a one-dimensional aspect on national service. I think it's going to be quite a more thorough conversation than perhaps maybe other locations cover on national service. So it won't just be all military and throwing hand grenades and etc. So we'll see how three-dimensional we get.
See where it goes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with throwing a hand grenade. Those are just fun to play with, but
they're highly overrated.
Yeah, and same with C4 and anything really explosive. If you've watched movies, that's not how the explosive world works. Now, my first question right off the bat is, what were your first thoughts? So let's go around, get some original thoughts. Pat, let's start with you. When you saw the email for national service, what was your first thought?
Well, it's funny because, it's a broad topic, and I think it's good that we have 2 hours to talk about it. But there's a lot of directions that we can go with this, and I think that there's many benefits and there's some disadvantages to having such a having national service. It'll be interesting. It's going to be good because I never joined the Army. You always get that sorry, my brain went sideways there. You always get that answer like, why'd you join the Army? Oh, because I wanted to serve my country. And I'll be dead honest. I joined the Army to jump out of airplanes and do cool shit. You know what I mean? And it was nothing about, nationalism or my country or anything like that. That developed after. Once I was in and I understood teamwork and I grew a cohesive bond with everybody and understood the history and all that. That's, even though I took that stuff in history, it wasn't until I lived it that I seen the broader picture of, my country and being patriotic. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's a great first place to sit. I'm loving this already. Greg, what were your first thoughts?
My first thoughts immediately kind of went, obviously I've spent a lot of time in other countries that have national service. Like Pat said, to kind of mirror him, there's a lot of pros to it. My personal belief, the first thing that came to my mind was at least my country, nationalism, culture, camaraderie here. If we were all patriotic enough and loved the United States, loved our country, and that doesn't mean hating other countries, we wouldn't need national service because everyone would feel a duty and an oath and a want to serve in some capacity. And obviously, when you have people serving as because of a want, not because they're being forced to, you're going to get a better, Marine, soldier, airman, sailor, whatever it may be, whatever path they choose. But I also think that we shouldn't be freeloaders on our government. We should be freeloaders of our country, and we should pay some sort of homage to the country that we live in.
I definitely agree with that one. Noel, what was your first thoughts?
So I thought national service can be so much more than just in the military. So I automatically try to not just go into military, like some other people have said. And what Greg just said was just spot on. Would you want to be in a unit with somebody who has been told to do this, to be forced to do this just because it's compulsory? That's not that might be a recipe for disaster. So I automatically thought, maybe first responders, volunteer work, something else that you can use even maybe locally, so you can support your community or help in your county or your city. That could be a form of national service. And I'm just going to try and come across, I'm going to try and not come across as like the dumb Marine who only thinks, oh, Marine Corps, jump out of planes and blow shit up, which was the reason that I joined the Marine Corps in the first place. But, now I'm 45, so I'm trying to, try and come across semi-smart.
Yeah, no worries. Then, so just as a heads up now, because it's happened twice, we're going to watch the language there, boys.
Now?
From now on.
Yeah. All right.
Sean?
Remember when the first two other times I was on, I did not curse? Now you got all the curses in one.
There we go. We got them out of the way. Perfect. Sean, what were your first thoughts?
So it is a big subject, and the guys have already got us off on the right track. So how I tried to figure it out this morning, or look at it from a different perspective, perhaps my own unique perspective, was when was the first time that I started considering national service? And when was the first time that I ever bumped into national service? So 2 quick stories. First time I ever thought of national service, or like intellectually or academically, or that conscious consideration, was reading Robert A. Heinlein's book, Starship Troopers, where essentially the premise of the book is to distinguish between citizens who are part of the federal service. So you had to serve the intergalactic space in order to become a citizen. In other words, you had to be in the military or something similar to the military, proto-military, to get your citizenship. And if you didn't serve, then you weren't a citizen. And if you weren't a citizen, then you didn't get to shape the politics of the day. You didn't get to shape your society. You were in it, but you didn't shape it. So I always appreciated that book in the sense of, you've got to pay the ferryman, you've got to pay the toll to have an opinion. If you want to shape the world around you, then let it shape you first so that your opinion has some validity. So that's what I took away from that book when I was a youngster. But then the first time I bumped into national service was in the very early 1980s. I deployed over to Norway for a month, and it was the first country I ever went to outside of Canada on behalf of my country. And of course, it was the first country that had national service that was, at the time, and I still believe it is, you are legally bound, or within the framework of the country, there is a law that states you have to serve your country. Now, it is a universal law, but it isn't universally enforced. So it is stated that you will serve your country. And out of that, every year, and it's approximately 80,000 people, every year that cohort of that year, which is approximately 80,000 people that reach that age for, we'll call it conscription, they then get vetted by the institution, by the military system, and it culls out all the people who will fit into that role, which is about 15 to 20%. So in effect, it's universally by law stated that you will serve your country, but only about 15 to 20% end up serving the country. But through that process, a whole pile of people start considering what it means to kind of deserve to be in the country, as it were. And so I find that there's many models out there since I've done my research this morning, many different ways to approach this model of national service. No one way is the only way. And so it really, I think, comes down to what the country's needs are. And more than anything else, it's proximity to a known threat. Here in Canada, we're pretty lackadaisical with our idea of national service. It's because we barely have any threats. I mean, honestly. But if you look at Latvia as an example, which is relatively new to the threat situation in its current state, it's really pouring gasoline on the fire to try to figure out this national service issue. And so, depending on who you are and depending on the threat that you face is really going to define what your sense of national service is.
Yeah, this is one of the few episodes that I've actually done some research on. I went out and did some reading on this, and I have it right here. Is the fact that there's 3 basic models for conscription. There's variations of these 3, but there's basically these 3, which is you have mandatory service. Anyone over 18 signs up. As soon as you hit 18, you're off to training wherever you go. There's the lottery-driven conscription, which actually, we brought up Latvia. It runs under the lottery-driven conscription. So everybody enters the draft, and then your numbers get picked, very similar to the US style in Vietnam. So everybody gets registered, but only selected people actually go to the draft. And then you were referring to Norway. They have a selective compulsory service, which is, again, the same system. Everybody registers, and then the people that are selected are chosen rather than lottery driven, just picked off the thing. So you're looking at people who are, there's a incentive to want to be in, right? So you're going to try harder to be one of those selected candidates. You want to actually pass the tests. You want to make sure that you're in, because a lot of the Norwegians, from what I was reading, Norwegians and the Swedish, it's seen as a stepping stone, similar to university or college here in North America, into the adult world. So like if you can finish your schooling and then bam, enter into the, be lucky enough to get into the service and then use that as a springboard to move your life forward. And I think this is a fantastic start of the conversation, but let's go around again. Greg, what do you think after you've heard all that?
So I think it's kind of twofold. And I absolutely agree with what Noel was saying, is like, do you really want to be in a unit with someone who is forced into the military? This is a model that I personally think policing should go to, and they do it kind of in the military, at least here, they do a poor job of it, where you are screened, tested, vetted for, and then placed in a position or a job set that suits your screening. So your aptitude, your physical fitness, maybe you're not so physically fit, but your aptitude's off the charts, right? Well, then now maybe you're screened to go into a more of an intelligence sort of pathway and not a combat role. You have experience as a mechanic, as an auto mechanic, and you take this battery of tests. Well, now maybe you go into, the motor pool avenue, or, you're physically fit, and your aptitude, your personality, your psychological evaluations lead you to a combat arms role. And now you're getting candidates that are actually going to a role that most suits them, their aptitude, their physical fitness, their psychiatric evaluations. I also think that if we had conscription here in the US anyway, those that were maybe on the fence about serving but have that drive would be more likely to actually go enlist themselves into the organization or unit that they actually want to be in, rather than it being left up to the compulsory service to say, hey, you're going here. I'm like, oh, well, I was on the fence. I really wanted to go special forces or SEALs or this or that. Well, now they've got some motivation to be like, well, I could get thrown into a leg infantry unit, but I wanted to go be an Army Ranger. Let me just go and enlist. And so now you're pushing people giving them a little bit more motivation to go into the military on their own accord. But, the thing that I see here, especially with the youth nowadays, is they've grown up here on social media. They've grown up here on tablets and phones and stuff their entire life. They have no idea about the rest of the world. They have no idea about other cultures and how they live. They have no idea what the world's actually about. I think every young person should have to go somewhere, go travel service. And like Noel said, maybe it's not just the military. Maybe it's the Red Cross as well. It's like, obviously in Utah's a very, very big Mormon state, right? Well, the Mormons all go on a mission after high school, and they go off for 2 years basically to another country and live embedded in that country to spread the word of their religion. I'm not Mormon. I don't understand a ton of it. I'm not super religious in general, but they go see another culture. They go live in another culture. It opens up their mind. They learn another language, and it just gives you a bigger view than yourself. You're not now living off the phone and ordering your Starbucks and your this and that here in the US, and everything's just butterflies and bubblegum. It's like there are still cultures on this planet in today's day and age where they've got to worry about getting eaten. And I really want to cuss right now, but I'm not going to. They got to worry about getting eaten by a freaking alligator or a lion going down to get water for their village. That still exists in today's day and age. But people here in the US, they have no idea what poverty is. They have no idea what struggle is, even the poorest communities here. And I think it would change the entire outlook of our culture.
Mm. You bring up a really good point. Actually, I was in a conversation last night and somebody asked me where the strangest place I'd ever been. And I was like, Kandahar, Afghanistan for sure was the strangest place I've ever been. And they were like, well, what's so different about it? I'm like, it's the 14th century. You're going back in time, man. Like it's not the same. Yeah. It's not the same world that we live in. So I love that point. And I want to get into this a little bit because you said experience another culture of your nation. And I want to touch on this in the fact that both the US and Canada, we are huge and we forget how large of a nation we are and how different the cultures are depending where you go within that nation. Like if you go to New Orleans versus Seattle, those are two very, very different cultures in the same country. Whereas say in the Netherlands, like Noel, most of the Netherlands is pretty similar, I would imagine. So I want to touch on that a little bit. Noel, what are you thinking?
Oh yeah, well, definitely. I think different cultures, exposure to different cultures, different people, different ideas, different situations, and ways of life. With all the pluses and minuses, with all the luxury and not having certain luxuries, I think being exposed to that really helps your development. And I think youngsters or young adults can definitely benefit from that. How many people do you know that after they go to college or university or study whatever, decide to take a year off and then travel? Right. I think that's definitely a good for just a development and mindset. But to come back to your question, in the Netherlands, yeah, definitely. It's even from the most southern part to the most northern part, everybody speaks the same language. It might just be a slight little twang here and there that differs. But when you look at Canada and the States and you put that over the map of the Europe, just the States as an example, or Canada, whatever, it's such a large place, and I can really understand that even. And I'm not an advocate for this, but even if you never leave the States, you can go to all the different states and you can learn something from all those different states and from the people that live there, right? But to to kind of like piggyback off what you said, like the weirdest place you've been in. I've been to Afghanistan as well. I remember, like, very vividly remember driving around on our armored vehicles and etc. And I was looking out over, driving away from Tarinkot towards the north of the area that we were responsible for. Just looking over Afghanistan, I was like, this is just planet Afghanistan. This could be like a whole different dimension. People were like carrying those jerry cans, those yellow palm oil cans that everybody got freaked out about. And I was like, okay, so some people are walking around here with a mobile phone. There's no running water and there's like no TVs. Where do they charge these things? It's like, it's just an odd place. Then, I visited Norway, of course, for the Arctic warfare course, etc., and mountain warfare course. If you visit that place, you're like, oh, it's beautiful here, and then it just rains cats and dogs, and you leave that place in November if you're going to mountain warfare training. You're going to be like, I'm never going to complain. I was going to say another word. Complain about the bad weather ever again in the Netherlands. That's a whole different level of being uncomfortable, and I think that's the point. Learning new things, meeting new people, and then being uncomfortable in different situations because of language or habits or luxuries that are not there anymore. I think youngsters, young adults can definitely benefit from that in their development.
Yeah, totally agree with that one. Pat, you got any thoughts on this?
Man, my brain is like literally exploding. I don't know which one to pick first because there were so many good points and avenues to go here. So yeah, like I'll try to organize my thoughts quickly here because national service is such a broad topic that has so many nuances that are really good. One thing that came to my brain was thinking about like the Germans. The Germans had like national service at one point, and I remember that was like kind of like 90s, early 2000s. And so like when we talk about like not wanting to serve beside a guy that didn't really want to be there, I thought it was interesting that Germany, like their conscripts are their own unit, and you could see it. You know what I mean? So like the tankers, like in Shiloh, like they were like you could tell the conscript tankers, armored guys, and you could tell the guys that were regular force. And there was actually quite a difference in kind of like their subculture and how they acted and how they were just holding themselves. Saying that though, like like this is like I do believe that there's some mad value in serving the country, right? And pushing people into it, like I don't know, like this time of age and this day and age, like maybe there should be a little bit more. Like if you even think about like what Sean was talking about, like where only 20% get pushed onto the military. But if that's already in the mindset or the brain, or even with like the Americans with like it's a very patriotic country, and there's like almost like a sense of duty, to serve. If like some countries, and I'm not going to throw Canada under the bus here, but like if that was kind of a more of a subculture belief that we should serve, that should be something that you should at least try or consider, right, and actually do it, I think we'd be better as a nation. And then you just talk about like service, and I know we're going to touch on all these subjects, but my brain's just exploding. You look at the IDF, like that's 3 years for males and 2 years for females. When they leave, like they are hardened, you know what I mean? And like, 'cause like we don't have to go way down to the rabbit hole of like of that part of the world, but like these people eat startups like they're nothing. A lot of these people go into business and eat startups like they're candy, multi-million dollar companies when they come out of there, right? Because they've had an education. I was looking up one guy, he was a marketing guy. He did his 3 years. He was in intelligence and like their special operations. And the guy has like this massive multi-million dollar company, and he had like 5 failures before. So he learned failure. He learned all these things that came with failing and building and finding out that space, but just ate it up because of his experience, or so I believe.
And there are examples of that all over the place. And Sean, I'm going to come to you with this one because I think this is a perfect question for you. Because we keep touching on this, is that, conscription or having conscripts with volunteers and back and forth. And there's a perfect example of this in Vietnam. You had lots of people who volunteered, and you had conscripts going overseas. And if you guys have ever read the book About Face by Colonel Hackworth, he talks about it. And he goes into the fact that if you have the right leadership, it doesn't matter whether they're a conscript or not, because with the right leadership, a soldier becomes a soldier. And that's just the way it is. Sean, you got any thoughts on that?
I'm going to touch on that on a sec because I want to throw this in front of it, and that is, and we're kind of talking about it right now, and it's the educational piece of why national service is so important, or I believe it's so important. And the the irony of that is, or the dichotomy of that is that it's extremely important to serve your country in some capacity, but you'll never understand that if you're not educated as to why it's so important. And that's where we do a terrible job here in Canada. I feel we do a terrible job of the education process of the value of serving your country in some capacity. Now, that could be in the military, of course. It could be in civil corps, a defense civil corps, or a civil defense corps. It could work in some form of civil government capacity where you're not a volunteer, where you're actually doing your job for about a year at a minimum. That's what I would love to see, is an education piece before any discussion about now you have to serve your country. We do a terrible job on the education piece. So if we're doing a terrible education here in the country, where does a person get educated? Well, for me, I've traveled to over 40 countries, and I have a good sense of things like national service, the upside and the downside to it. But more importantly, I have a good sense of the world's culture. That doesn't mean I'm a genius, doesn't mean I've got my finger on the pulse of the world. It just means I know more than having grown up in a tiny little mountain town and then never moved out of it. I have a global perspective on this subject, just like I have a global perspective on many subjects, because I've freaking pushed my pace around the world, trying to understand the world. And therein lies the problem. You can't understand how to do things well in the world if you've never seen it, or no one's telling you about it. And I find that on a nationalistic level, each nation says what serves it the best. So as Canadians, we know Canadian stuff, but we know not enough about everything else around us, because that's the nationalistic side of things. But even within Canada, within our nationalistic focus, we don't actually do a very good job of pumping up the nationalistic focus. We have more interest as a nation in a hockey game than we do in our nation. It's ironic, but maybe that's for a different day, a different conversation. I'll get back to your question, Chance. So with military service and using the Vietnam War as the example, when conscription came along, of course, that created a massive divide within the population. There were the people who had to go, and then there were people who were ducking out. And just those two factors alone, conscription or national service, if it's not done well, can be a unifying force or it can be a divisive force. And so I'm not going to build that out, because the simple statement alone stands by itself. I'm curious as to what you guys think on universally, is national service a unifying force, or is it a divisive force, or is it, the third option, so very dependent on who's deploying the solution?
Ooh, that's a dang good question. Greg, I'm going to come to you first. What do you got?
So one of the things that I think is funny, and also it can be all of those things that Sean just mentioned, I think, and it really comes down to the unit, the leadership of the unit, and you'll have a unit here, right? And all the guys are in the unit. They're all in their same fatigues, the same uniform. They all look the same. And then for the first time after training, they get to go out for a night, right? They get to go out and party. And you have a guy from the unit who dresses up like a cowboy, shirt tucked in, cowboy hat on. And you have another kid, you got a black kid from the ghetto in some inner city, and he's dressed like a gangster. And then you've got some preppy kid who's dressed and then you've literally, and it's all these kids from different cultures around the country that would never, ever, ever be friends or never hang out together under any other circumstances. And you know what? They don't care. They don't care, because it's not the kid from the projects in the city and then the country cowboy Texas boy who should be mortal enemies. They're teammates. And they built that camaraderie. And then it's hilarious. The first time you ever see these kids go out after like basic training or whatnot, and they've never seen them dressed in normal clothes and their street clothes. And it's like under any other circumstance, you'd never see these kids or these group of people hanging out. And I always tell people, like, we're not divided in this country. The media tries to portray that we're divided. The media tries to make us divided. We're not actually divided, because I've worked with Black guys, I've worked with Asian guys, I've worked with Native Americans, I've worked with homosexuals, and guess what? If you're good at your job, nobody cares. Nobody cares if you're good at your job. So, you know, I definitely think leadership, they say there's no bad units, right? Just bad leaders. I do agree with that. I will say there are, I want to use a term that's colloquial in the US, but it's a cuss word, but there are bad apples, right? There are bad apples that I think just, it is what it is. You can't make them good. Just like there's good people and there's inherently bad people, right? And those bad apples have to get pushed out, because one bad apple spoils the bunch. You've heard that term, that saying. But I do think it comes down to leadership, and the right leader can turn someone around who doesn't want to be there and really give them empowerment and give them that sense of service, that sense of something bigger than themselves. And I think that's why I think it should be something here in the US. We need to be forced into a unifying organization, a unifying culture. Because look, I know you guys had mentioned up in Canada versus down here in the US, but we are not that patriotic anymore. We are not. With the new administration coming in, I think you'll start to see that ramp up a little bit. But our culture would much, much, much rather go see an American football game, which I don't watch football, just so you guys know, right? I don't even know why it's called football. It should be called egg ball. But football, you play with your feet. It's soccer here in the US, right? But, you know, they'd much rather watch a sports game than sit and learn about history or service or why patriotism is important. And patriotism has almost gotten a negative connotation. Like if you're a patriot, well, then you're a racist, or you hate other cultures, or you hate. No, I don't hate anybody. I mean, sure, there's some people that I hate, right? But like, I just mean I care about my country, and I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of my culture. I want to give back. I want to serve. It doesn't mean that I hate anybody else.
I wonder how much of this plays into just general gratitude. And I'm kind of going off the lane here on national service, but I'm wondering how much that patriotic understanding, because for me growing up, I loved history. I loved learning about history. My granddad was in World War II. He was a combat engineer like I was, and I learned a lot from him because he was into history, because he was patriotic. And I, growing up out on the ranch, you know, country boys are some of the most patriotic people I know. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they are grateful for what they have, because they know how easy it can be taken away. And so I'm wondering how much of this plays into just a general sense of gratitude that creates this desire to, like, you know what, I have it so good right now, man, I really want to make sure that everybody else gets a taste of this as well. Pat, what do you think?
I'm just going to talk about, you know, just serving in general. And, you know, that, because that's like the basis of this conversation in a sense, is like, do we make it, like, would it be smart to make it mandatory to serve? So to like kind of piggyback on what Greg was saying, like, you know, being even able to link in with all the people that are within your country. So like I was saying before, like I just wanted to jump out of planes and have fun. Like I just wanted to do cool stuff, you know, and you go into basic training and like, it's everyone from Canada. Like if you're in the Canadian military and you don't have at least one really good friend that's a newfie, you've never really served, right? And I mean, like we're talking like, you know, these guys are hilarious, but and super smart and super good soldiers. And but you get to learn all these different things. And like Greg was saying, you go with that first night, is it like week 8 of basic training or whatever it is now, and you're finally allowed to put your civvies on and go out. And it's literally this, mix of dudes that are just so stoked to hang out with each other and just kind of blow the steam off. And it's super rad. It's such a great feeling. And I guess what I'm saying is that like, not only do you start to learn how awesome it is and how awesome your whole country is, like it's really an eye opener of the breadth of your country, right? And the depth of your country as people, as humans, right? That's what builds the national identity. That's what builds the patriotism, right? Is that all these people are like your friends. All these people are similar to you, and they're unique and all that stuff. And you end up becoming a better cohesive group. And right. And so some of that brotherhood cohesion builds into like a more national cohesion, and then you go to like a different country as that group, right? And you get to see those other cultures, and you get to see how, piggybacking on what Chance is saying, the gratitude of how amazing Canada is and how important it is to continue to cultivate, a national identity in a sense, and be, and I'll put it loosely, patriotic, right? Because you'll realize how awesome it is to live in Canada when you go live in Afghanistan for 6 months or whatever, right? And so, you gain huge gratitude going to these other countries, seeing these other cultures. You can appreciate them and stuff like that. And then, but when you come back home, you're like, wow, do we ever have it good? And you have even bigger pride and sense of what living in a Western free country is. So there are so many benefits to serving, in general. Like, I'm not trying to be a recruiter here, because that's where it seems to be. Like, I don't see Canada ever doing national service, but there's so many benefits culturally, psychologically, like, I mean, we could have a side argument on that, but there's so many things that make you grow as a human. It almost forces you to grow. It forces you into teamwork. It forces you into leadership. You get a crash course in leadership. You get a crash course on culture. You get a crash course on cohesion. It's there's so many benefits.
I love the crash course on cohesion, because really you don't have a choice. You have to work together. Otherwise, you're going to be doing push-ups for the rest of your life. That's just the way it is. Noel, you got any thoughts on this?
So many good points came across. I got some stuff from Greg that I totally agree with. I know that's easy to say, but same with Pat. Some things, I'm just going to try and recollect them all. So first of the words, the first word that came to mind was trauma bonding. When you go into basic training and the group starts to form itself, and like in the Marine Corps training or whatever unit you're in, then that group grows together. Then I remember going out the first time, and I think it was like the last Thursday before the final exercise, that they were like, okay, you're allowed to go off base and everything. And the Netherlands is not that big, so it's not like a very odd bunch of people, but it was definitely like, oh, you're dressed like this. Oh, he's dressed like that. And you never thought about someone that way. You judge them by how good of a teammate they were. Does he have his stuff squared away? Is he a good buddy? Is he a good teammate? Then I thought about something else, and that was, if you're in an operational unit and you get sent out on a deployment or a mission, or you have a goal that you're working towards, then the trauma bonding and learning to get to know each other and all that stuff, then you have a mutual goal that you are striving towards. The could be with the Red Cross or whatever, that this is our goal and we're working as a team towards that. So you're learning about teamwork. You're learning about responsibility and taking ownership of your job, and perhaps also learning about somebody else's job, so you can be that teammate that can get in there and help out if it's needed. And it's not just about leadership in a group, or about coaching and leading others. It's also learning how to lead yourself, to take responsibility and ownership of your own mistakes or your weaknesses, and trying to develop them. There were some other things, but everybody's kind of touched on all of those points. these were just the first things that that came to mind.
Yeah, love it. This is I'm super digging this conversation, and it brought to mind an interesting point. Is the Swiss actually have their entire system of conscription is designed around civic service. So it's not just the military, as we've said before. You get to choose what realm you kind of want to go into, whether it's governmental, whether it's uh, uh, social services, or into the military itself. And they have short time periods. I think it's a year for the Swiss. And to me, I think a year is too short myself, but that's just my own opinion. And I love the fact that if done correctly, as Sean was saying, if done correctly with a civic mindedness as its root, I think conscription could work not only in Canada, but I think US and a lot of places that has perhaps not as much overt nationalism. I think it might be helpful if you made it more of a civic focus rather than just a military or armed forces kind of setup. Sean, you got any? Oh,
Sorry,
what you got? No, go for it.
There was one thing that I really liked that Greg said that was about patriotism. So sorry to jump in here. It just came back to me. So there's a group in the US, GBRS group, and like I really like what they put out, and one of their members is from the UK, and he says, or he has I think his name's Jay, but he has Everyday Patriot, and what it and what it means to me is you can be proud of your country, you can be proud of your, whatever what it stands for the good things and also for the bad things. It could be like our country is the best. You could go like, hey, I'm very proud of our country, even even with all its flaws. And then what I was saying at just a few minutes ago, working on yourself, leading others. When you then leave the unit, or if you're still in the unit, you can decide to work on yourself and then also be proud of your country or your unit or whatever, and then decide to improve it. So you can be an everyday patriot, you can be a patriot, but I don't think it should be, Canada sucks, or the U.S. sucks, and the Dutch, if it ain't much, if it ain't Dutch. I think that's a wrong way of approaching it. I think you can be proud of your country and, be the first to admit, we got to work on some stuff here. That's what I wanted to say. Sorry to come in between, guys.
I love it, man. That's awesome. Sean, what were you thinking?
So one thing for Noel, being in the Netherlands, perhaps it's a little more homogenous, or there's less big cowboy belt buckles next to someone in a purple velvet suit in the same unit. But, that kind of goes on over here in North America, but probably less so in the Netherlands. However, one thing that is for sure that I've experienced anyway is a lot of Europe travels the world more than North America. So kids from the Netherlands, kids from Finland, kids from Sweden, kids from wherever in Europe generally have a better sense as worldly travelers versus just hanging out in their own little town. And so I've found, again, traveling around the world, speaking with lots of people who are traveling around the world, they are well educated if they're from Europe, more so than if they're from North America. Just thought I'd throw that out there as a random, not fact, but observation. Yeah, something that is of interest on national service is, again, you don't have to serve in the military as part of national service. National service can mean many things, but as for all of its positives, and there's many, which we've yet to bullet point list out, but for all of its positives, there is one thing that holds back national service in most modern countries, or in most first world countries, and that is kids coming out of high school look forward to going into university. And the reason that they look forward to going into university is because they are part of a system that requires that 4-year degree in order to move into the working force to be quote unquote successful. And so that's the bill of goods that most kids have been sold nowadays, at least in Canada, is from high school, you go straight to college or university, you do your time, and then you're into the workforce and you do the grind. And that's just kind of the template. And so if that's the template, if that's what kids are being told as they're coming up in high school, as if I was in those shoes as a kid in high school, in grade 11, grade 12, I'd be thinking like, hang on a sec, I got to go do a year of national service and then actually start my life. That's what I hear from kids, is they don't want to have that gap year of national service where they feel they'll be a year behind anyone who doesn't do national service. And so I think the path forward for national service, if in fact it ever did occur in Canada, would be that somehow that national service time is accredited or is given the acknowledgement that there is value, therefore that has 20 credits or whatever the case is, that somehow can have a kid think, man, I'm going to go serve my country and I'm going to improve my lot in life through getting these accreditations that are formally recognized by my fellow citizens. And that's just food for thought.
So on that, Greg, I'm going to hit you right in
Yeah,
2 seconds here. I just want to hit on that directly. They have that now here in Canada, where your leadership courses throughout the military are actually counted towards credits for university and college.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand. I've actually got some of those myself. What I'm referring to is kids, high school. If should I join the military? Should I join the civil defense corps? Should I ... as a kid coming out of high school? And more often than not, the answer is going to be no, because quote unquote, I don't want to be behind the rest of my peers.
Yeah, right. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, and I think on Sean's point, and something else that I was talking about on another podcast with a friend of mine a couple of days ago, that's the narrative that we need to shift. Because same thing here in the U.S., we would need to shift that narrative that your year of conscription, your year of national service, whatever it is, whether it's a year or 2 years, it's going to catapult you forward. You're going to gain these skills. You're going to gain this knowledge. You're going to gain this experience. And then to Sean's point, like same thing, we have certain courses here where you'll get college credits for it through the military. Certain medical courses in the military can transfer to the medical certifications here in the civilian line. If you go to military free fall school here, you can get signed off by the U.S. Parachute Foundation Federation to get your basically, I think you get your C license for skydiving. So there are some things, but I think we need to change the narrative that national service is not putting you back. It's not putting you behind. You're actually gaining a massive amount of skills. But I think that narrative of go to high school, get good grades, get to a good college, go to college, it's all self-serving. And our country here, the U.S., the culture here has gotten incredibly self-serving. And unless you go to like some of these real rural farm towns, farm countries where they need to work together to farm the field and make a living, everything's massively self-serving. And one of the things that I talked about with my buddy Eddie on his podcast, and this kind of goes to Pat's thing, is, obviously I tried to get in the military. You guys heard about it on the last one I was on. I tried to get in the military before the war kicked off back in 97. And due to a food allergy, I got permanently disqualified. They denied a waiver. I wrote congressman, tried to fight it. So what was my other choice? I went and joined the police force in the most dangerous city in the country at the time. And then I was able to go volunteer and become a contractor and serve my country in that manner. But my whole thing was not patriotic. It wasn't to serve my country. It was to go do cool stuff. It was to go shoot guns and blow things up and jump out of planes and hunt bad guys. That was really the reason. But what you find once you're there, once you're in the training, once you're in the unit, is the only thing that matters is the guy to your right and your left. Right? So now you become a part of something bigger where your success isn't the most important thing anymore. Greg's success of getting straight A's and getting to a good college and getting a good job out of college isn't the most important thing anymore. It's all his teammates on the other side of this screen and them succeeding and them being as good, if not better than me. And that's all that ends up mattering. It's not the patriotic, it's not the foreign diplomacy or the country strategy at war. Who cares about that? I didn't know anything about what our country's strategy was when I was over in Iraq working for the NSA. All I knew was I had a job, I had a mission, and my teammates, and that was more important than anything else. So you go from this selfish, self-led service of me to, oh wait, hold on, them, us as a team. And I just think it makes you a better person. One of the best things that you can do, the only thing that's better than your own success is watching your buddies and your loved ones' success.
Yeah.
And that, like, especially if you have a part in it and you've helped them achieve that, that is the best thing ever in the world. And we need more of that. I know in the US, we need a lot more of that.
Can I just add something? What,
Greg,
those are like amazing points, definitely. Sean said something that I really liked. So, Greg, what you just mentioned, that's great, but that's what people see when they're in, right? Like after a while, because of course, everybody wants to earn their spot on a team and, their tab, their scroll, whatever, they want chest candy, they want ribbons and medals and all that stuff. Everybody wants that, right? In the beginning. And then it's about being a professional, being a pro, doing your job. But to get people, instead of going to high school, college, or university, I thought about this, and obviously this is not a silver bullet. Perhaps they could make this more like an incentive. Like if you serve for 2 years, they will take away like an X amount of your student debt or something. That you end up when you graduate and you finish. They could go like, okay, you did something for us. Now we're going to do something for you. We're going to take X amount off your student debt when you finish your university, whatever it is. Maybe you're already done with university. I thought about that. So you might have people that go in going like, I just want to take some money off of my student debt. And then they might end up like, coming for the student loan, but staying for the teamwork and the professionalism and being part of somebody who, gets the job done.
I mean, down in the States, they got the GI Bill, right?
GI Bill. Yeah, we have
so
the GI.
That's a part of it. I mean, here in Canada now, you have to serve, I think it's 8 years to get $40,000 worth of schooling paid for, or 12 years, you can get $80,000 worth. But I think people are starting to get to that idea of, afterwards, then you can go to school. And I think I've said this for many years, is that, militaries around the world and countries as a whole, it behooves that nation to turn out solid veterans, like people that have been in the service, they've done great work, they have all this experience, and then they get out and get some schooling to get a qualification for whatever it is they need, and then jump right into the workforce, because it's a recruiting tool, first off, right? Because, I mean, Sean, you told a story at one point, you meeting an SAS dude, I think, in the woods way up in northern Alberta. That type of recruiting tool, seeing a solid veteran who can come to your school, or you meet at work, or you see in the schooling system, and you're like, man, that guy is like squared away. I want to be like that dude. All right. And that can lead people into the service as well. So it's funny how after GWAT, you look at a lot of the way soldiers were treated after they got out was just like we don't need you anymore. Shut up over there.
Mm-hmm.
Versus what really could have been a fantastic recruitment tool and maintenance of retention and keeping people in by turning out solid, experienced people. And it blows me away that was like, it's just a drop ball left, right, and center. John, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, I do agree, Chance, and I think that a large part of it is simply, there's two pieces to it. One, no one felt obligated to figure that little piece out to the benefit of the country, like obligated. And obligated usually is because of good cause, good reason. There's a demand for it. but there was no demand for it. It would have been nice if someone could have taken the veterans out of GWAT and turned them into like their full potential, but that's kind of like a nice to have, not a need to have. And so it's the cultural understanding of what is right and wrong, or what is a need and what is a want. And because there was no need to turn those GWAT veterans into something for the future, like today, into a version of themselves that we could use now instead of then. And so that foresight, that long-term vision of veterans that have come out of GWAT, we might need them in another 10 to 20 years for another reason. There's no big grand vision for these kind of things. There is no strategic idea on these kind of things. There was little tactical ideas like throw a bone here, throw a bone there. Maybe we can flip a coin over here. But none of it was ever massively strategical 10, 20 years down the road. That was definitely a drop ball. And you know what? Today, we will continue to drop that ball. And we will for another 10 to 20 years because, again, the cultural understanding, certainly here in Canada, is not wired. It is not resonating with the idea that we need to make some changes. We need to make some changes as a country on this subject of national service. We, at the very least, need to have the conversation. And then we need to have an educational piece to see if that changes anything. And national service, as Pat said, I don't think it'll ever happen in Canada. But that doesn't mean that the conversation shouldn't be had. And that doesn't mean that people shouldn't think about these kind of things to understand not just their responsibility as a citizen within their country, but also why are we failing at times as a country? These big, big questions around terms like national service are almost like a proxy for, are we doing well as a country or not? If we're not talking about these things, if we're not thinking about these things, if we're not moving towards things that are improving our country, are we failing as a country? That's my thought.
That is it's quite the question, and I think that's why we had this conversation, right? You and I were talking about this as an aside in afterwards a different podcast, but we came up with, we have not talked about this in Canada, especially has never been hugely outwardly patriotic. We walk around with a little flag on our backpack, and that's about it when you talk to people. So it's an interesting conversation. Pat, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I've got a bunch of thoughts. One of them was, incentives for recruiting, like, when we're talking national service, because like it probably would be more of a volunteer based kind of thing, right? And how do we improve that recruitment model? And I was thinking about basic training. Like, you can do basic training and you can get out immediately afterwards. Once you graduate, there's no like, we are going to force you into the next phase of training. So maybe if there was more incentive at the end of that, say, money towards school or credit or whatever, because even basic training has like a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say is it has a lot of benefits, right? I mean, at what point in basic training, and I'm sure some of you guys could relate to this, but at what point are you like working on just your room, like just where you have your closet and stuff like that? And every day, like the sergeant comes in and tears it apart, throws it apart. These boots aren't right, the pants aren't right, whatever. And all of a sudden you realize like the immediate teamwork happens. Like, yeah, when you're under the eyeball of like your superiors, yeah, the teamwork happens, right? Or you get punished. But there's like a certain point in basic training where all of a sudden someone goes, oh, that dude's good at ironing pants. So I'm going to give him my pants and I'll do his boots because I'm good at boots, right? And then all of a sudden that turns into a more bigger teamwork that actually is better for the workforce once they leave, or even school, right? And then flipping it all the way to the other end of at the end of your service, talking about the veteran thing, most vets are highly adaptable to the civilian workforce. We have a hard time transitioning out of the military, and for other reasons, I think but it's not for getting a job and working. because our work ethic has already been established. We've learned that through the military. We've learned, all those things. We understand hierarchy, the whole stuff. Like, I've gone into the film industry, and if you actually look at the film industry, you look at a film set, it's actually ran like a military unit. Everything from the comms to the chain of command of like the director, all the way down to the keys. I was able to walk in there and adapt to it in like a week, not even, right? And then I think of like the countries that do have like conscription, and I'll use the IDF model again. Like, they've done studies where PTSD is very low in that country, and they do and we know that that's a very volatile area, right? So you'd think that everybody would have PTSD in that country, but the thing is that everybody that is there has served. So when you come back with some of those scars psychologically, everybody has had a taste of that. Your aunt, your uncle, your dad, your brother. So you're able to converse and talk, and that actually has a better impact on the society as a whole, right? Because not only have you served and you've had to defend whatever you're defending, or I'm not going to go into that political side of things, but the point is that you've done some traumatic stuff, and now you're able to come back, and everybody is there because they've already lived it. So those are just some of my thoughts on those subjects.
That's a great point. And I mean, the US and Canada especially, okay, and I keep coming back to this because I know in Europe, as we've already stated, you have smaller countries just geographically. And here in Canada, I have a buddy of mine who he got out of the military, went to Afghanistan with us, came back home, but he was a reservist, and he got sent back to his hometown of Flin Flon, Manitoba, which is like in the middle of nowhere, right? And there were really no one else to talk to. So he was just sitting in his own head, trying to fight with Veterans Affairs, trying to do these things by himself in the middle of nowhere. And I think that is a part of it for sure. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, we've been talking a lot about the benefits of national service and, some of the things that can bolster a nation. But we haven't talked about a lot of the detractors. Some of the reasons why you wouldn't want national service. And one of the ones that came up was that when I was doing my research was money, because it costs a ton to maintain and run consistent recruitment and training. You need to have a full force of instructors and a cadre that are constantly running. Like, that takes a heck of a lot of time, a heck of a lot of manpower, and all the hours in the world. So there are some real struggles with that, as well as the cultural ones. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on some of the things that you think why it wouldn't work. And this one, I'm going to start with Sean, and then we're going to go around.
Sounds good. Of course, there are downsides to national service. But before I get into any downsides, let me state that, well, what's the alternative? No national service, and here we are. And so, and by the way, the current state of affairs, using Canada as the example, which is the one I'm most familiar with, if we all believe that the current Canadian model of service is serving our country as well as it can, then do we just keep on doing that until eventually enough robots are invented that now we've got our robot army, our robot national service? Like, how long do we wait? Do we just keep twiddling our thumbs and hoping that what we've got as an existing model is going to get us right through to the time where we need it the most? Well, I don't think that's a great approach, is hope. So national service or something like it has to happen. Now, the downsides to it happening, of course, are, I've already stated one, and that is the financial aspect. For any young person who's getting out of school and is looking at something called national service in the immediate future, then they're wondering, like, now I'm a year behind. I'm 2 years behind my university degree. Now I'm behind my peers. Now I'm ... And the problem with the ... is the unequal or unfairness of things. So if in Canada, as the example, we approached it as you're going to serve your country unless you're a conscientious objector, and then you don't have to serve. And now we would go from 100% subscription rate or conscription rate right down to, if you say, no, I don't want to do that, then you get out of it. Now we've got a 10% traction rate or a 3% traction rate. But worse yet, it's not the traction rate of who stays in to do the national service. It's the people who don't get in. Now we've got that division again of, what? I got to do all the burpees on your behalf while you're in school making the big bucks. That division that I'm creating right now as the thought construct is a real freaking thing that very few people want to talk about. The unfairness of serving your country can put you behind peers who don't want to serve their country. I'm going to use Greece as the example now, the factual example, which is they have a conscription. It's mandatory. You will serve right now. And if you are a conscientious objector, then you have to serve in a civil capacity. And if you don't do that, then it's fines, baby. You're getting fined. And I don't know how far or deep or how long that all goes for you if you're getting the fines, but at least there's some clarity to the situation. You either serve in the military, you either serve civilly, or you get fined. And I would think that if you are fined, you are also to some degree socially castigated. And I'm not sure because I'm not in Greece right now, but I bet that's a thing, at least in a small sector of the population. So what's the negative? There's many negatives. What do you guys think?
Yeah, let's go around. Noel, let's start with you. What do you got?
So I thought about this. I can only think about some of the detractions that I had personally, or that I've found that were in my own personal situation that I found very tough. And I'm talking about transitioning, right? But if you think about it, like for the whole country, I have no idea what that would be like. Money, finances, obviously, and time. Money for the country, like the finances and the amount of money you have to set aside to get that all going, obviously. Then the time, those two are, I think, the most important ones, either for a country or personal, right? So, for instance, like we were talking about mandatory service and stuff like that. So in the Netherlands, compulsory. I looked it up. Compulsory military service has not been abolished, but has been suspended, or citizens are no longer forced to serve in the armed forces as long as it's not required for the safety of the country. Right. So when I think about what Sean said, when I think about my own situation, I think it's very difficult. There's a lot of things going on in my head. I wanted to talk about some of the negative sides that I've noticed for me personally, being in the military. And I hope that it kind of answers the question. But I had a tough time coming back from Afghanistan and then eventually leaving the Marine Corps. Because coming back from Afghanistan while still being in the military, everything was fine. Everybody that, the unit that I served with, everybody understood, right? People that have been there can never kind of explain to the people that have not been there, and they won't be able to understand. That's what I found mostly, right? And then getting out of the military and transitioning, some of the detractors that I've noticed personally was some of the things they really want you to do, and the way how they want you to act and think and do all that stuff. Some of the things don't serve you that well in the civilian sector. So you need to really dial it down a couple of levels. And if you don't, you're going to have a very hard time getting used to civilian life. So it might not be on a national level. It might not be on a grand scale of things, but that's some of the detractions that I found personally.
Yeah, it's funny because when I got out of the military, I went into school directly, and the school that I chose was a rural school. It was doing an equine program about with horses and stuff. And in my class there was 35 people, and 2 of them were dudes, and I was one of them. And all of the rest of them, there was I think maybe 4 that were over 20. And so I went in as like a 30-something-year-old Army veteran coming off of Afghanistan. I'm like, I'm a big tough guy. I'm going to do what I want. And I was surrounded by 19-year-old girls. And it was a challenge just to survive the day, let alone get through the schooling on top of that. Pat, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, I'll tell a school war story first. So I went to Van Arts, like media arts, for my professional photography program, and I literally had anxiety, I think, before the first day, because I realized that pretty much everybody that's going to be in my class wasn't even born when I went to Afghanistan for the first time. And so I was like, "Oh my God, what is this going to be?" And it was funny because it was a great experience, and I got along with everyone really well. But just some of the things from my service like gave me such an advantage. We go on these photo walks, and and they'd be pretty long. We walk through the whole city doing these photo walks, and I'd put everything in I'd bring the kitchen sink in my camera bag. I have a 40-liter camera bag. I have two bodies, four lenses, bring my lunch, everything. And some of these guys just have like literally a sling bag, and they're like, "Oh, this is so hard." And it would literally, like, I think with the year I did it, was like we had just atmospheric rivers back to back downpours. And I'm walking in my Gore-Tex with my basically a ruck on, and I'm like laying on the ground to get a picture of a duck while it's pouring rain on me. And I loved it, and everybody loved the picture too that I got. But it was such a weird subculture shift because nobody could even relate to what I was doing. They probably just thought I was fully insane. Um, we come back though to the money thing, and I'll piggyback on what Sean was saying. Like, we talk about, oh yeah, it would cost a lot of money to do this. Man, I'm sorry, but like all the first world nations here, and I'm not trying to get political, but we throw a lot of money into a lot of dumb things. And to invest it into our actual people, and our actual youth, and the people that will be forming this nation, whether they serve civically or military, is, the compounding effect is exponential, because it doesn't matter if you go into the park service and you're building trails in Banff National Park or whatever, cutting down trees and building these log stairs and doing all that stuff. There's work ethic learned there. There's improvement to our country. There's improvement to the parks. Or whether you're serving in like some sort of medical thing, or even a volunteer thing, there are so many compounding like benefits for the country, for the people that live there. Why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we have some form of that?
Yeah, this is it's a tough one because we all come from a service background to like say, oh well, there's some rough things about service. So it's I can see how it's challenging to get into these things. Greg, you got any thought of this?
Yeah, obviously, I think logistically that would be the initial hurdle, right? Is like how many American kids turned 18 today? In the US, obviously a very, very, very populated country. So logistically, definitely there would be a struggle, but I don't think it's a struggle that we couldn't overcome, and we could. And, hitting on Sean and Pat, I was going through some stuff the other day on one of my shows, and our past administration was spending $20 million to start a Sesame Street show in Iraq that forced inclusion, diversity. So they were doing a Sesame Street show for Iraq, for Iraqis, that had basically like homosexual and transgender Muppets, if you will, or whatever they're, like, come on. Like, you can't even make this stuff up. So $20 million, and that's not even a big number. Like, I mean, think about all the money that we've sent to the Ukraine just to get laundered, basically, by our past administration. And we don't need to get political, but yeah, the amount of gross overspending that I know the US did, and we're reeling some of that in. And sure, so does some of it still go on? Absolutely. But it's just out of control. So logistically, if we wanted to, we could fix that. For us, we have the National Guard here, right? And you could go Army National Guard, you can go Air Guard, you could obviously go reserves. We have the Coast Guard here, and they're obviously, Marine Corps reserves, Air Force reserves, whatever it may be, naval reserves. And I think, having some base of conscription, mandatory national service, in that, you could kind of almost, kill two birds with one stone, where the kids turn 18, they go off to their basic training. Most of the basic training here is about 13 weeks long, depending on your specialty or your schooling. And then after basic training, they come back to their hometown. and they check in with their local unit, their local reserve unit, or their local National Guard unit. And then they can go to university. They can go to a trade school and learn a trade or get a job. But then 1 week in a month, they go to their unit and they train and they prepare. And then a short deployment comes up 2 weeks a year. They go off, they go do their deployment, they go cross-train, knowledge transfer with another country and another country's unit. And it can build that camaraderie, that unification, that patriotism, that nationalism in a positive way, yet not detract from their advancement through university or through trade school or through entrepreneurship and getting a job. I spent 4 years in the UAE, and the UAE is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and it's only comprised of 33% Emirati. So only 33% of the people living in the country are actual citizens and Emiratis. And they have a national service. They have a conscription, 18 to 30. You have to go serve 1 year in their military. And if they can do it, anybody can do it. Now, granted, I know it's a much smaller population, but it's also a much smaller country. And you would have Emiratis pulling up into the military base that I worked at in $300,000 McLarens and Maybach Mercedes. And these are like the wealthiest of the wealthy. They don't need to do any of this. And then you've got them ruck marching through the desert and through the sand and doing hits on their mount villages and whatnot. But they've made it a very prestigious thing to do. So they're proud of it. They're proud to go in and serve their country. So even though it's a mandatory conscription, when it comes their time at 18, they want to do it. They want to do it. And then they're released into the reserve force. So now they have a reserve force of an entire nation, essentially. And I think that's a model that we could absolutely do here and would be massively beneficial for our culture.
I could not agree with that more. And I just looked it up. 18 people turning 18 is around 4 million people a year in the US turn 18 every year. So you'd have quite the workforce. And there's a number of nations, again, when I was doing some research, there's a number of nations that have a similar setup where it's a reserve system where you go in, you do your training, and then you go back home. And then you basically are just on reserve for however long. And you get the choice of going into the Reg Force or going into a Coast Guard or whatever unit from there. And I think this is it's a really interesting point, because the ability to not only serve, but then also work. So here in Canada, we have the reserve system as well. And I think it's 2 weekends a month and 2 weeks a year you got to spend on exercise. I've worked with a lot of reserve guys. They're solid troops. I've worked with a lot of Reg Force guys that aren't solid troops too, right? So there's both sides of it. And like you said earlier, there's, like I can't remember the word for it, but the bell curve. There we go. In anything, in anywhere you go, in any unit you're part of, there will be a bell curve of solid people and not so solid people. So I think that's part of it. Now, I guess I'm wondering how we could possibly implement it, because within our nations, like you said, we have to develop the educational system. We have to develop the logistical system to manage it. But then, even then, to get the people to the places that you have to get there, which is hugely difficult, especially in the United States. It's a little bit better because you have bases kind of everywhere. In Canada, there's like 4 main bases, period. And everybody's got to go to one of them, which then creates in my mind, this would create a construction boom. So it'd actually be highly beneficial for the country, because you'd have to build all the spaces for people to live. You'd have to build all the logistical systems for them to be set up with roads and all these blah, 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 which would create a massive boom for the country. And I'm just digging this conversation so much. I apologize to everybody who's been commenting, because there's so many comments here that I would love to get to, but I'm just going to hit on a couple. So KH jumped in here earlier. He said, historically, national service has led to a more disciplined society because they understand their fellow man deeper and face hardships together. And I think this is part of why, when we look back at the generation that came from World War II, and we call them the greatest generation, you had an entire generation of people who all went off to the military. And whether they served overseas or not, they were part of that team. And then they all came home. They all know how to work together. They all know how to live together. They all know how to do the things together, et cetera, et cetera. On the flip side of this, though, Sean, you mentioned Starship Troopers earlier, and Greg, you had mentioned you didn't really know the grand scheme of what was going on. In the book of Starship Troopers, you could be abused quite easily. Like the units could be abused quite easily, or just thrown into the wind, which they kind of got. You see it in the movie, but troopers getting thrown into the meat grinder of just off you go. And Greg, that could very well happen, right? If the military, you go into it and you're not really big on the large schemes, the strategic picture, that military could get abused very quickly, very easily from higher up. So I just want to get your guys' thoughts on that. Pat, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Because I know we're not trying to go political here, but like normally nations like that, if they're, we'll say, don't have the best intentions, yeah, it could completely abuse the citizens and use them as cannon fodder, and that is it's always a big concern, right? Who's actually like leading your country? And I mean, I'll go down an avenue here that just popped into my head. Like, if some of our leaders and some of our politicians had mandatory service at some point in their life, they might have a different perspective on how fast they'll send you out to fight for stuff, or what they'll throw you into, because they would have a better understanding of exactly what a battle space looks like and what a conflict is. I'll use that Letterkenny quote. Like, we're basically like, what was it again? It was if you've ever been in a fight, you probably wouldn't be looking for another, right? And so that's a dangerous thing. And then you look at, like, even with the Ukraine conflict, like the first push into the Ukraine, most of it was Russian conscripts, and they got annihilated. And then what does that create? That creates like a huge distension within the society. Everybody's flooding out of that country. I'm not going to get conscripted to be cannon fodder. So yeah, there's a huge top end thing that would have to happen, or things put into place, or policies put into place that you would have to be very careful with that. I mean, as first world nations, I don't think that we're immune to having a bad leader do that to us. But on the flip side of that, like, a generation or two, or if this was implemented earlier, if some of those politicians did have to serve and there was a pool of them there would be actually a better balance of some of that stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Noel, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, you definitely don't want leaders that, just throw troops anywhere without any thought. The first thing, just a random thought that came to mind about Starship Troopers was, remember Kalandatu, where everybody, where all of them, fought. And another thing that popped in my head was from the movie, that's everybody fights, nobody quits. That's where those were just like the catchphrases from Starship Troopers. But on a serious note, obviously, and we can talk about war, we can talk about military, or service, and not have it be abuses. Like, it's difficult. I'm trying to gather my thoughts and some of the points I wanted to make, but
I can come back to you.
yeah, but I wanted to say something like, war is old people talking and young people dying. So I think if being able to command troops and not abusing the troops, or just having them annihilated, or bad leadership, I think being part, I think national service, even if it's you're serving in politics or whatever, I think being part of a military unit and having served, I think it makes you more conscious of certain things. And then maybe being in the military and then becoming a politician, being in a position where you might be the Secretary of Defense or whatever, I think that would also increase your just your mindfulness, or your mindset on serving others. Definitely not doing this so you can be, you know, a politician for a couple of years and then, you know, become a CEO or whatever. Those are the things that I'm thinking about in a grander scheme of things. If that makes sense, that, you know, taking a responsibility to be in politics and then maybe commanding troops, or I think for some reason I get like a heavy feeling when we talk about this, and it might be, you know, that I've read a lot of books after getting out of the service, getting out of the Marine Corps, and getting reading a lot of books about Afghanistan. Not trying to be, now it's my turn to try and not be get political, but if you read some of the books, I think the book was called the Afghanistan Papers. I've read that book, you know, with a heavy heart at the end, because I read a lot of stuff. I was like, leadership kind of was not, you know, on top of things here and there. And, you know, some people might not agree with me, but I really don't, you know, I really don't care. I read that book with a heavy heart. And I think those were some of the thoughts that went through my head, you know, random stuff all over the place. Sorry about that. But I think that was kind of the point that I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking. You brought up an interesting point in my mind too, is the fact that if somebody who's in service would also better know, or somebody who had been in service then entered politics, they would better know how to utilize the troops themselves, because instead of just utilizing, you know, oh, we'll just send the army in and they'll deal with it. They actually know what the army is. They actually know what special forces are. They know how to utilize what and where and when. So that would be an interesting point as well. Greg, you got any?
Sorry. So one more thing. I don't want to get too political once again, but even as somebody who does not live in the United States, I was kind of excited to see what would happen when, you know, the former General Mattis got into a certain position. I was like, well, I hope he can bring a positive change to all of this. But, you know,
I was also, and I really enjoyed his book as well. But
yes,
yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. Greg, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, you know, I agree with a lot of the sentiment, and I think if you ever had to make a decision that put other people's lives in jeopardy, right? If you ever had to go through a breach with another group of men and watch your friends or teammates die, and then came back in a political governmental role, you would be much more tactful with how you employ your own troops, right? And it wouldn't be just, I'll just send in the Marines or send in the Army or send in this or that, because you've watched people die. We were guilty of this. Look, we should not have gone into Iraq. And I'll get political, but it fits the narrative of what we're talking about. We did a fantastic job in Afghanistan in the first like 3 weeks. We did what we were supposed to do. Our, you know, CIA, our tier 1 units, our tier 1 elements, with our allies supporting us, working together. It was an intelligence and special operations led campaign that did a fantastic job. But guess what? Going in strategically and hitting targets and killing or capturing bad guys doesn't put money in the pockets of the war machine and the support and the bases and KBR and the Pizza Huts and the Popeyes and the Kentucky Fried Chickens that you open there and the mechanic shops and all the war machine. It doesn't make people money. And they didn't get that in the first 3 weeks of Afghanistan, right? So what do? We occupy and we build all these bases, and then we start making all the political elites and the wealthy elites richer and richer and richer. And then what do? Well, we go into Iraq. Well, there were no WMDs in Iraq. Was Saddam a bad guy? Yeah, he was. But you guys know that part of the area, that part of the world, you kind of need a bad guy. And then what happened once we removed Saddam? It was a floodgate for all these other elements, right? You cut off the head of the snake and then 7 arise. What's better, one known enemy or, you know, a bunch of unknown? And we did that. We were responsible for it. So unfortunately, I think a military is only as good as the politicians, the government that wields that military. Because when it comes down to it, if the politicians and the government say, hey, you guys deploy here and go do this, what is the military going to do? They're going to say, Roger that. They're going to salute and they're going to go deploy and do it. And that's the war machine. And I think if we had politicians that were mandatory service, well, maybe they'd be a little bit more tactful in wielding that sword.
I 100% agree with you, Sean. I can see you just gnawing at the bit. What do you got?
Well, no, I agree. I mean, like one of the issues with national service as to probably never going to happen in North America, at least in the near term, is because of poor leadership. And there's a bunch of people who wouldn't want to sign up for national service because they wouldn't want to be involved with the idiots who are running the show right now. And so, like, who on earth signs up to be part of a loser team? No one. You sign up to be part of a winning team. That's just the way it is, man. And that is the general perception out there right now, is leadership is doing it so poorly that I don't want to be part of it. Now, having said that, and I'm playing the devil's advocate, obviously, but having said that, putting military service off to the side and considering a civil defense force as the example, and there's a real need for it, certainly here in Canada, and by the way, in the United States. And the example that I'm going to use is, it doesn't matter how many resources you've got, how many bases, how many, all of the things spread all across your country, inevitably, you need some help. Like, as an example, the fires down in California, down in LA, there was Canadian airplanes flying across the border to go do water drops. Canadians getting involved with Americans, Americans getting involved with the Canadians. Nothing there is national. That's international service. International service, working together. And the only reason that can happen on a limited basis out of Canada down to the United States is because we have limited resources when it comes to responding nationally or internationally. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's no reason why spread across Canada there can't be centers of excellence or pockets of resourcefulness or deployment centers where, when national disasters or provincial disasters are occurring, something can respond to it other than 10 guys out on the left coast who've got some spare time on their hands because everybody else is so busy elsewhere. We have got such limited resources for national emergencies that the very first port of call is the military. If there's a fire in Alberta, military. If there's a fire in Quebec, military. If there's a fire in Nova Scotia, it's the military. And we've got so limited resources with the military. What's next? If a train is going slow in Toronto, do we deploy the military? Well, you can only go so far. You can only stretch the resources so thin. And we are stretched thin right now. What we need at a national service level is something that at the very least can help with civil deployment matters, civil emergencies. We're so busy trying to solve problems overseas, we can barely solve problems domestically. I would like to see a restructuring, a prioritization to tactical and strategical issues within our country and internationally. And it does not feel like we've got a good balance right now.
No, our balance is it's very much off, and I think it's very much in the international, overseas, and I think this comes from, we set ourselves up pretty well after World War II. Let me just state that we had an entire generation of people who built the infrastructure and built the nations, both Canada and the United States, as well as in the Netherlands and all over Europe, because they had to rebuild everything. And then from that, we set ourselves up to be comfortable. And then a generation lived comfortably. And some people went off to fight, right, with Vietnam or with Korea, or so you'd have a small portion of people who were separate from it. Whereas in World War II, it was a national thing. Everybody took part of it, even if you were just at home and you had to deal with, you know, good restrictions, right? You can't get this much sugar, can't get this much butter. After that period, it separated the warriors from the citizens. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that we have to manage with national service. And John Minari actually jumped in here with a comment I want to touch on. He says, I always loved the idea of national service for all the reasons being mentioned. So how do we push it? You start an official petition, some decent incentives. This is doable. Loving the episode. And I want to touch on this, is that how, right? Like, where would it start? What would be your first step in developing this? Would you go to the schools? Would you go to the federal government? Would it be a provincial thing? I think a provincial or a state-run system similar to the U.S., where they have the not the National Guard, but like the state.
National Guard. Yeah, so National Guard is state-based. So we have the Utah National Guard, you have Louisiana National Guard, Alabama National Guard, California. So every state has their own National Guard within that state. And then some of the units span multiple states. Like, for example, here in Utah, we have the 19th Special Forces Group. The Army National Guard houses two Army Special Forces units: 20th Group out on the East Coast, 19th Group out on the western side. So Utah houses basically the battalion headquarters for 19th Special Forces Group, which is a National Guard Special Forces unit. And these guys are fully qualified Green Berets, just like any active duty unit. They go through the exact same pipeline, have to maintain the exact same quals. And so we have 19th Group here in Utah. We have a 19th battalion down in Texas. We have one in Nevada, one in California, and then same sort of thing on the East Coast with the 20th Special Forces Group. So yeah, each state has its own National Guard. And while I've kind of got the mic, I don't want to step in too much, but I think the way we start is we massively incentivize it, and we make it something that is proud and beneficial and gives people, hey, well, not only is this cool that I get to do this, but I get X, Y, and Z if I go do this. So I want to go do it because of money or student loans or this or that. Mm-hmm. We have to incentivize them to want to go to do it initially. And then we can kind of say, okay, cool, you have to go do this, you know?
I like that. So it makes sense to get the logistical and the educational side to hit that first, and then develop the nationalistic side. I think that I like that a lot. Noel, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Lure them in for something that they think might serve them personally, and then they might be able to find some pride and some self-development in being part of that. This is slightly something different, but here in the Netherlands, European-wise, we got some flack for this. We had youngsters, so like not yet 18-year-olds. Had like I think it might be something like ROTC, but they're like juniors, but they're just not 18 yet, but they were wearing uniforms, and which is a touchy subject if you live next to Germany. And then you know what I mean. And then they were like they were able to do 2 or 3 years being instructed by Army NCOs or Marine Corps NCOs, and they were allowed to kind of develop, graduate and get a diploma, and then they were kind of incentivized to, hey, do you now want to join the Army or join the Marine Corps or join the Air Force, etc. But that's currently going on right now, but we took away all of the uniforms, I believe. So once every 3rd week or 4th week, they'll study in school, and then 1 week they join a military base or unit, and they go into the field for like a week, and they get taught like drill and everything. Obviously not, they don't carry real guns, but it's like shaped like a gun, and it weighs like something equivalent to a rifle. But that's what's going on right now for the last couple of years in the Netherlands. But like I mentioned before, and what Greg actually more eloquently formulated was, make it something that you can be proud of. I mean, I cannot think. It's difficult for me to think about. Why wouldn't you want to join, right? Because we all joined, and I was like, I'm doing this. I wanted to be able to say years, like decades later, be like, yeah, I did this. For me personally, not for anybody else. So. But I can understand if you got like you don't like the taste of crayons, and you're semi-smart and you don't want to join the military, that you're gonna like, well, I just want to, I want to work in a lab or want to do this, and I don't want to take time away. But making it something that is, considered something very cool, making it a cool incentive, like you want to be in a laboratory, you want to be a doctor, a genius, whatever, cool, we're going to take away some of your student debt or student loan. I think that would be a great idea. But you're never going to butter up everybody to get this done. Some people will always gravitate more towards being in the military, and some people won't. Or national service, I guess.
I really like that. And it's interesting you bring this, it just clicked in my head, was I think I'm the only guy that signed up because I thought it was my duty to sign up. Like everybody else is like, yeah, I wanted to go shoot guns and do all the fun stuff. And I'm like, I was one of the few people, even when I was going through basic and talking to the guys that I've been overseas with, I'm one of the few people that literally I just saw it as my duty to do. And once I decided that was the reason, then I was like, what's the coolest thing I can do in here? And I was like, yeah, I can blow things up and build bridges and do heavy equipment and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I'm in. Let's do the engineers. But to that point, I think there's a way to incentivize people for sure. And I'm wondering, could we do it with the youth today? This is a whole nother side thing, but I'm going to keep going around. Pat, what do you got?
Well, the biggest thing is, and I think it's been brought up by Greg. Like we have we have a very self-serving society right now. So incentivizing, I think, would be probably the best way to do it, whether it's monetarily, school credits, whatever. Um, because I truly believe that that's where we are now. I mean, you can just see it in our social media. We can see it in our society. It's very self-serving. And, and then to touch on Sean's thing, like, again, because we're talking about national service, like, yeah, maybe we have a civil emergency division, you know what I mean? Which is, somewhat, it would probably be started off by the military and like, kind of ran like that. But if you had somebody, because you look at like the military, like, yeah, they call us out for everything. Like we had the ice storms, the floods, the fires. Like there are nonstop things that we get deployed to aid our country in. And if we had the civil emergency force or division or whatever we want to call it, whatever be the PC term for that, um, it would still be a crucible, right? Because they'd be trained in like probably firefighting techniques. They'd be taught, like how to ford up a river, how to do all these things. So there's going to be still a crucible kind of like experience to learn to work with your fellow man and do stuff better for the country. And then maybe from there, like, because it's all about recruitment pipelines, right? Like I don't know how many times, like, I think I was in basic training in '94, and we had GTF had just started up. We had the newly appointed CEO come and have a quick talk with us when we graduated, and I was like, "What is that?" And then I realized that I wanted to shift gears because I actually wanted to be a SARTech. I wanted to go the SARTech route. Um, and so, and me personally, like I wanted to make holes as well as patch holes. So we don't have PJs in our military. So I've realized that I had to kind of like shift that mindset. But anyways, my point is like, yeah, the incentivization of serving in a self-serving society, I think would be the best model for that. You can't force anyone to do anything these days, really.
Mm. I really like the fact, and for those that don't know, SARTechs are search and rescue technicians. They're we only have a few of them. There are not many of them. They're highly trained, highly skilled people. But to your point, if we had a civil defense force, let's just call it that for lack of a better term, even in the U.S. or anywhere else, really, you could it's a perfect pipeline, right? People get trained as firefighters. Okay, well, now you're in the smoke jumpers if you want to go that realm. If you get trained as flood management, then you're going to be really good at filling sandbags. I mean, that'd be a big part of it. there are so many benefits in terms of recruitment and like training pipelines that you could set people up really well. And to your point earlier, Greg, you were mentioning the skill sets being available to those units would be, it'd be amazing to be able to set that up. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, it would be amazing, but it isn't just like, yeah, that'd be amazing. It's freaking mandatory. Like, we desperately need it. All you got to do nowadays is if you're anywhere near a car accident or a store robbery or a freaking minor issue on the sidewalk, just watch society as a whole. Watch its eyes bug out, its jaws drop, and it lock itself into place, not knowing what to do. Nearly every man, woman, and child in a moment where there is like extreme adversity, doesn't matter, a tsunami, it could be a plane crashing, it could be a meteorite, it doesn't matter what it is. In a big situation, nearly every single person in that situation is frozen in time because they are untrained, incapable, unqualified, unaware. They wish they were somewhere else other than the spot that they're in because they've never been there before. That's our biggest problem in our society nowadays. Up here in Canada, certainly, is nearly the entire population doesn't know how to deal with extreme adversity. That's the way it is. And I'll tell anyone that. I'll tell the highest of the high and the lowest of the low that as a society, we've kind of got weak. And I'm not saying like weak as in y'all suck. I'm saying you just don't know how to deal with problems that are big problems, like in your face problems, like blood and guts problems, the meteorite problem. We just don't know how to deal with it as a complete society. And what we desperately need is more people who know how to deal with freaking meteorites. And so then what? How do you do that? Well, it's not just like happenstance that these things get figured out. It takes someone who says, that's it. We're going to fix this. Give me X amount of dollars, X amount of time. My deliverables will be in place 10 years from now. That's what it takes. Whose ass do I have to kick some sense into to make them understand that that's the way it works? But no one's going to give me an ass to kick. I'm just going to complain. Just going to say my bit, and then we'll move along. And 10 years from now, Canada won't have a civil defense corps. Well, here it is. You heard it now. Get with the program, someone.
I think John Minari was setting it up, so we got him in the background commenting all over here place. So he might just take the ball and run with it. I think that's part of it. Greg, you look like you got something. What do you got?
Yeah, so we mentioned it a little bit, and you brought it up again, Chance, and Noel spoke about it quite well. One of the things we do a bad job of here in military service is when you go in, you go to recruit, you take what's called the ASVAB, right? The ASVAB is it's essentially like a technical proficiency test, right? And depending on your score, it kind of shows your aptitude, and then they're going to place you into a certain job. And if we had someone who is dead set, who wanted to be a doctor, wanted to be a veterinarian, and we told them, well, before you can go to university, go start your veterinarian career and your schooling, you've got to go serve in the military. And we're going to put you with a transportation platoon, a unit where you're going to learn how to drive a truck or a tank, or you're going to go be a mortarman or an artillery person. That has zero to do with their want in life. Then again, what incentive do they have? Okay, some money that's not real tangible yet. Oh, you get it at the end and we're going to pay for your college. So they never even actually see the money. They don't, there's no incentive for them to really want to go do that. Whereas if we could say, hey, you've just applied to this college and your major is, chemistry. Well, guess what? we have the best scientists in the world working for the military. And that's what you're going to go get to do for 1 year or 2 years. Oh, you want to be a doctor? Cool. We're going to put you into the medical route. We have everything at your hands, at your disposal in the military. And if we did a better job and I know it's all needs of the military, right? Needs of the Army, needs of this, needs of that. Well, at some point, we've got to cater a little bit to the needs of our citizens if we want them to want to go into the military. And if we could kind of cascade them into that route, yeah, you've got to go do 1 year of national service, but that 1 year, you're going to get to work with the best and brightest scientists working at DARPA. You're going to get to go into the military, but we're going to send you to, we're going to make you a medic, and then we're going to put you into the veterinarian pipeline. Then they'd be more adept to, maybe more agreeable to actually doing that. And then when you get out, you get your college paid for, and you get this. And it's like, oh yeah, sign me up. Cool. I wanted to go do that.
One of these things that clicks in my head every time is that you're not just getting an education, you're gaining all the experience. Right. And to your point, if you want to be a vet and they're like, we'll put you with a dog unit. Cool. Right. You can go work with them and like work dogs and learn how to get all the training. And then you come out with experience. And we have this, I mean, even the US does well with the officer route, right? You go to West Point or you go to Annapolis or you go to RMC here in Canada, but they don't have it for the junior enlisted for some reason. And a system like that could be easily, I think, set up, but it is again, a lot of it comes down to money. I think that's really one of the hardest points about this. So I don't know how we manage this without getting into a political conversation.
It's not money because I think it's already been established, and maybe it hasn't been established factually just because we didn't take the time to factually establish it. But I think it's fair to say that there's so much gross waste of money that could be applied to these kind of productive needs, as in setting up some sort of a civil defense corps, or taking every freaking citizen and teaching them how to put out fires properly, or how to put a field dressing on, or some such thing that is of use to their fellow man. Not the transactional aspect of what's in it for me, but what's in it for your fellow man. That money could be made like that. Bam. It already exists. It just hasn't been digitally redirected to a civil defense corps, because it's not the money. It's the why. It's the why. It's never the money. The money's invisible anyway. It's ones and zeros. It's not the money. It's the why. And up here in Canada, our why is like, no big deal. We got no problems. We got loads of time. What's the pressure? Why? That's our national attitude right now. Why? Rather than, why? Are you kidding me right now? I'll tell you frickin' why. That's the distinction. It ain't the cash, it's the attitude.
I like it.
Can I add something on that point?
Yeah, give her.
So, that's the same thing. Like, one of the things here in the States, if you talk to anyone who served, anyone who went through MEPS, who went to the military, the not the stigma, but basically the underlying theme is never trust your recruiter. Your recruiter is a used car salesman. Your recruiter is a snake oil salesman, and he's going to tell you whatever he wants, whatever you want to hear to get you to sign and go to MEPS. Right? Oh yeah, you want to be an Army Ranger? Cool. We're going to make you an Army Ranger. No problem. Look at you. You're in great shape. Blah, blah, blah. You're scoring the ASVAB. You can go, okay, go through MEPS. And then you sit in a little office with the job counselor. And then the job counselor feeds you a completely different line of BS and says, well, we don't have any billets right now for Army Ranger, but look, we're going to make you a truck driver. And then when you get there, you can just apply for Ranger School. Or to go to RASP, right? And these kids are getting chewed up at the very, very beginning, at the very onset, and they're being lied to. And that's a known thing now. So it's like, if they're not guaranteed, because you're not guaranteed anything, right? Hey, you want to go be an Army Ranger? Cool. You can sign up under this contract. And what we're going to do is, after basic, we're going to guarantee you a spot at the selection process for RAS, Ranger Assessment Selection Program. Now, whether you get through that selection program and get to go to RAS or not, that's up to you, but we're guaranteeing you a chance at the test, right? if you knew you were going to get to go try to do what you wanted to do and signed up to do, and then it's on you. Hey, you didn't prepare enough. You're not in good enough shape. You're not smart enough to go down the vet route, and you get thrown somewhere else. Well, that's on you. That wasn't the machine that lied to you and fed you this BS and then put you where they needed you, because they don't care about you. And that's, they're learning that right out the gate. Hey, guess what? You signed up to Army. You joined the Army because you care about it and you want to go serve, and you learn right out the gate that the Army doesn't care about you and they sent you somewhere else that you don't want to go. What is that telling kids, you know? And I agree with Sean that it's not the money. It's the entire culture around the military machine, at least here in the US, that we've got to do better. We've got to show that we actually kind of care about these kids that are signing up to go do this.
It is a it is a consistent problem, I think, in every military. I've met someone from a lot of different militaries from around the world. I've talked to a lot of people throughout this show and my previous show. It is a consistent problem throughout pretty much every military that I've seen, that the recruitment numbers need to come up. They'll say whatever they need to do to get the numbers in, and then once they're in, we can figure it out from there. Whereas, like, to Sean's point, there's just no strategic thought process. It's all right now, knee-jerk reactions. Oh my God, we have to put this, put that, put these things, without any sort of long-term thought of, man, in 10 years we could have an awesome system, but there's no will to put it in. And we're almost at 2 hours now, and I just can't thank you guys enough. This has just been a fantastic conversation.
So why is there no will? Why is there no will? I mean, like, do you think there'll be fires this summer here in Canada? And the magical fire fairies that are going to put out all of those fires are coming from where? Where's the will? How is it that citizens are so comfortable sitting on their hands with no will to address these things? Why? I'm asking you guys, why is it?
This is why. This is the why right here. Because they can get on their phone and they can see how many likes they got on Instagram. Oh, look how many likes people like. I'm like a big thing. People like me. Hold on, let me order my Starbucks real quick. And you know what? I'm going to order lunch, and then it gets dropped off, and it's all right here because they don't have to do anything anymore. Life is too easy.
Noel, what do you think?
Yeah, a couple of things. So some part agrees with Greg, and the other part thinks about a quote. I'm not going to try and say it, but it comes down to youth of today is lazy. They don't stand up for when they don't respect their elders, and blah blah blah, and this and that. And it was a quote from the time of Aristoteles. So, there's like this thing that perpetuates like today's youth is lazy and blah, blah, blah. But we were today's youth at one point, and we decided to not be one or the other side of the bell curve, I guess, and decide to do it anyway. I think some people will always be drawn to the military and to service, and some people will not. But it's unfortunate that you can get on that rectangle thing that just screams for your attention, and you can you almost get paralysis by analysis, or like stress where you're like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? But I guess jumping out of planes gets you a lot of likes, which is cool. But I don't think you can get in a point that people that are in the military shouldn't get on social media, especially not do stupid stuff while wearing uniform. That's another different discussion. But I think I try to finish with this positively and go like, people that want to be in the military, that want to serve others, that want to make the most of themselves and think they can do it through helping others, they're going to be drawn to the military anyway, or join Doctors Without Borders, or the Red Cross, or even if they help serve food at the local homeless shelter or whatever. I think there's definitely ways to serve your other people and yourself eventually by doing that. But getting today's youth, today's young adults, to get them there, that's luckily above my pay grade.
That's a nice way to put it. Pat, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I might tell a bit of a gross story here. So I agree with Sean's point. Like at what point is it like very detrimental to society that we don't have some incentive or some way to get people more interested in serving their nation, right? Or even their municipality or their province or state. So I remember, and this was like kind of during the COVID times, a lot of people were pushing out to some of the more outskirt areas of the woods, trying to get escape from the lockdowns and all that stuff like that. And there's a lake that I used to go to all the time. I'd 4x4 down there. It's quite a trail, and I would go paddleboarding. And the one day, all of a sudden, I noticed there was a commotion happening over on the shore, and I could tell something was not right. They were pulling a body out of the lake, and I basically paddled over, and I actually had to take command of them because none of them knew first aid. None of them knew what to do. They were just in full panic, and I had to take control of the situation, start CPR on this guy, put him in the back of a truck, 4x4 out of there while giving CPR in the back of the truck, teach the other guy that was in the back of the truck how to do compressions because I was burning out because it took us about 45 minutes to 4x4 out of this one trail just to get to the main road, to the gravel road, and then coordinate the air ambulance to meet us down that gravel road for this guy. If I wasn't there, like, unfortunately, he didn't make it. But if I wasn't there at all, like that they would have, like, that body would have been there for hours, and it would like, there wouldn't have been an attempt. You know what I mean? And it like some of these things, like a civil defense force, military, whatever, we forget about all the huge amounts of education that we get in there, right? And it doesn't matter in which service you go to, if it's for civil or if it's military, like you get first aid, you get WMIS, you get all these things that benefit the workforce, the society, the people of the nation, and this and your even your local municipality. I live in a town that has a volunteer firefighter. How many military dudes that see that when they get out and they're like, I'm going to go be a volunteer firefighter. If I had more time or I had a stronger schedule, I'd be 100%. I'd be a volunteer firefighter all day.
This is it's a beautiful point in that, first aid at a bare minimum, basic first aid, I think is something that should be taught in school. Like, I don't.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
The school system has failed all these programs. I didn't mean to cut you off, but the school system has failed all these programs. They've cut out PE, they've cut out all these things, right? And so because we're losing that in the education system, there should be some sort of stopgap after, you know what I mean, or within. I don't know how we would implement it, like the actual plan, but yeah, we're failing in that sense. Yeah, there's no first aid in school. There's no PE in school. There's no, what I mean, it's just like math, English, get your grades, get out.
Yeah. This is unfortunately, I've seen this firsthand, is similar to what you're saying there, Pat, is somebody who's never done any sort of first aid. And I was talking to her afterwards. She said that I had to watch my dad die because I had no idea what to do. I just sat there and I couldn't call 911 because they were totally frozen up. They had to do all these things, and that's part of some of the skills. And one of the things I see all the time is people don't know how to do compressions, but they think, because they see it in the movies, right? You just hit them on the chest a bunch of times, or you just kind of like bounce on them. And like, no, it's friggin' exhausting. It's a lot of work. You got to push. It's hard. It's not something that is easily as you see in TV or movies where there's like 3 chest compressions, the person like jumps up like, I'm okay. Like, no, you're going to be there for a long time, and it probably isn't going to work. So this is all part and parcel of the conversation, but unfortunately I got to shut her down because I know it's late for Noel, and I know everybody else is busy. We got stuff to do here. So I just first off want to say thank you guys, because in my mind, this is where it starts. The conversation is where it starts, where people start going, hey man, we need to get this sorted. How do we do it? And so I'm going to ask you this as a kind of a final thought. What would you do? What would be your ideal system of national service in your country? Let's start with Sean. What do you think?
Well, it would be, my ideal version would be a parallel play. It would be an educational process simultaneously with the actively engaging the population process. And by actively engaging, I mean, you're going to frickin' pay. You're either going to serve the military or you're going to serve your country in a civil capacity. And if you're object to that, if you don't feel like you need to give anything back to your country, if all you feel is you get to take from your country, well, then you are now a active objectionist, and there will be means to remedy that. And by means, I mean everyone has to pay. If that means your taxes get an extra 20% added, okay. If it's 10%, okay. I don't know what it would be on a policy basis, but in my perfect world, you serve the military, you serve the civilly, or you serve the tax base. Either way, you've got to give back. You can't just take.
Yeah. Noel, what would be your perfect system?
I wholeheartedly agree with Sean. He gave the example of Greece, I believe, and I was like, that's actually a great idea, but unfortunately, I'm not into. No, luckily, I'm not into politics. I'm not in politics, so that's once again not. That's way above my pay grade. I guess that's a great way of phrasing it. Don't just take from the table. Bring something to the table. You can't. You could be like an object to some things, but how are you? It's the same with politics, right? If you don't decide to vote, I think you can't really complain. Because if you want to change something, if you want something changed, you got to be a participant in bringing along change. So either serve the military, or like I said, local homeless shelter. You can be part of that and improve there, even in your own province, whatever. And otherwise, if you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that, I'm like, okay, cool, man. Thank you for your money, because you're going to be adding to our budget, and that way we can make it better, even if you're not filling sandbags or filling plates.
Absolutely. Pat, what do you think?
I don't know what the right answer is. I love Sean's idea. I think it's super solid. I don't know how that would be actually implemented or how it would be received, but I mean, if we had someone that was hard lined and implemented it, that would be a solid way to do it. And then I also look at the because we brought it up at the last, and it's kind of sparked into my head is bringing it into at the high school level. And that could be just serving your community, or it could even be. I know the Russians aren't super liked right now, but like in their high schools, like they have just a lot of cool programs, and maybe that's a recruitment tool. Like they have skydiving, they have shooting, they have all these different things, and it's all taught by the military in the schools. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, jumping out of planes with army guys was kind of fun. These guys are cool. Maybe I want to do that for real. You know, um, there's no like force of service there. It's just a taste, but it still gives an experience. And I think that's one thing that we super lack in life right now. When I look at the last generation and the current generation going through high school, they super lack experience other than going to school, get the grades, go to university, right? There's nothing outside of that. They're not being shown the scope or how much more is happening on their globe other than by social media.
Yeah. Greg, what do you think?
I don't know if I'm going to go into depth on what I think the perfect system is, but I'll kind of say I think where it should start. And that should start kind of Sean's first point, education. We need to change the narrative and the culture behind military service and service to others in general. And I think that starts in grade school. It starts with kids in 3rd and 4th grade, in the different education systems. And we have JROTC, junior ROTC in high school, where they wear the military uniform of that branch or organization. And, they learn how to march, and they learn how to land nav, and they learn some of these skills to get them prepped to go into the military. But I think if we can change the narrative and the optics and the culture starting at a young age, that's the first thing. That needs to happen, I think, before anything else happens.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As I was listening to all you guys, I was thinking to myself, how do you separate between federal, provincial versus state or municipal? And I was thinking to myself, those would be timelines, because if you want to stay in your hometown and just work in your hometown doing social work or something like that at local community stuff, okay, well, now you got 3 years. You want to work provincially and be in like one of the disaster relief teams, cool, now you got 2. You want to go federal, work for the military, work for higher headquarters, whatever, that's a year. And that benefits are all the same, but you get to either work in a community for a longer time or you work federally for a shorter period of time. And there's so many ways to do this. Like,
Crafty devil, Chance Burrows. Well done.
yeah, there you go. I'm thinking about it. But so again, I can't thank you guys enough, man. This has just been absolutely fantastic. I think we hit a lot of points. There's obviously, the conversation could go in many ways. And I just want to say thank you guys for not taking it too politically, because it could have easily gone there, and keeping this at a really solid, understood level from men of service. So I thank you guys. This has just been fantastic. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.